maybe we can start with you, John.
Hello, everybody. Welcome from beautiful Fallbrook, California. My name is John York. I am a lecturer over at UC San Diego in the Institute for the Global Entrepreneur and doctoral student over at Cranfield School of Management in the United Kingdom.
Hello, everyone. My name is Denis Iurchenko. I'm an assistant professor at Cal Poly Pomona. So look forward to the session. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jamey Darnell. I'm a clinical assistant professor of entrepreneurship at Penn State in the Smeal College of Business. And also currently I'm the interim director for the Center for Penn State Student Entrepreneurship.
Okay, so perfect. Okay, so since we're still waiting for Mushtaba, do you think each of you guys can kind of intro your topics a little bit, and as we we'll start to gather all the other information on the back end. So maybe John, you can start with your topic and just kind of do an intro on it.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Actually, we should go the other way. Jamey, Denis, myself, since I'm the cleanup hitter.
Yes,
So,
yes. Do it the way you guys were planning. Great.
Okay, yeah, so again, I'm Jamey Darnell, and I'm going to be leading a discussion for about 5 minutes on Beyond MVP using a website to create an exceptional, viable product for student startups. I've kind of seen the need for something in between what I've taught in the past, which would be a very low level kind of minimum MVP, and the low fidelity, and then high level courses teach like kind of a full on e-commerce website. So I'm teaching something in the middle now to some of my students.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be my name is Denis Iurchenko. I will be presenting our project called Responding to the Crowd, How Online Investor Entrepreneur Discussions Inform Equity Crowdfunding Decisions. And I'll be talking about equity crowdfunding as one of the ways how entrepreneurs can validate their customer base and can receive approval about the product. Specifically, I will be talking about in what way equity crowdfunding is different from reward-based crowdfunding. And also specifically, we will go into campaign management. How does campaign management work? What are the necessary campaign management skills for entrepreneurs? And we will finalize by providing some suggestions for education. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm the Lean Startup Junkie. I've been teaching Lean Startup for 6 years. I think all of us have been involved with it one way or the other. I have authored 4 papers, and I'll have my 5th submitted this week to Business Horizons around Lean Startup. Due to my interest in that area, a fundamental question we have raised relative to this methodology, and it is really how do we define success. And so I'm going to take everybody through basically some of the work that I've been already starting in my doctoral program to be able to tee up some key questions and ultimately 2 ideas that may lead to collaborative research. And I'd love to get some feedback around those.
Okay, great. So Alex jumping in, and he's going to moderate for the session.
All right. So let's start. I mean, I'm just jumping into this session now, but let's start with our first presentation.
All right, so that would be
Jamey,
me.
You're up.
That would be me.
Okay, good. Now,
Can you all see my screen?
Yeah, but
Yep.
somebody's echoing, so.
Yeah, it might be me. Am I still echoing? Am I still echoing?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about Beyond MVP using a website to create an exceptional, viable product for student startups. I've gone a little bit text heavy in the presentation here because I think that might work for this remote environment. So we'll see. And if anybody has any feedback on that, that'd be great. I've been allotted about 5 minutes to talk, which I think should be enough to kind of give you the idea of what I've been thinking about. When I originally submitted this for the conference, I thought it was really kind of spot on with the conference theme of rapid speed of change to the new normal, et cetera. But I think now even more so in this remote environment that it's really important for student startups to have an MVP that has kind of a digital online aspect to it. So in this short talk here, I'm going to kind of make an argument for why I think we need to move beyond MVP a little bit and come up with a little bit more of an exceptional viable product. So let me first review a little bit the lean startup in case anybody is not familiar with it. So I teach from the entrepreneurship is a process perspective, and then within that I teach lean. So entrepreneurship then is a process that can be learned, can be taught, and experienced by students. That's what I try to have them do. And of course, lean, right, is kind of all about being efficient, not wasting resources, engaging with the customers and validating assumptions, et cetera. And so one of the very popular ways to do that is to do that through the minimum viable product. And then traditionally, the minimum viable product is, if you look at the Lean Startup book, it's quote, right? It says, remove any features, process, or effort that does not contribute directly to the learning that you seek. So in my opinion, I think this is a little bit too stringent. Yes, I think definitely the MVP should focus on, validating and validating assumptions. It's geared towards learning, addresses a problem, designed for early adopters, yada, yada, yada. But there are a couple of problems, I think, I'll explain kind of in this presentation here. So it's low fidelity, the emphasis on that. In my experience, students tend to really gravitate towards that low fidelity end, towards the minimal effort, minimum quality, and turn out MVPs, at least in my classes. Hopefully this isn't a reflection of my teaching, but they tend to turn out MVPs that are kind of, problematic. They're not very functional or viable. It's not something that I would suggest that they show to potential customers or investors, et cetera. And so my thoughts are, could we teach them to do something that's a little bit less boring, a little bit more creative, still viable, but still efficient. And so I've come up with the idea of that, and then I've been teaching it to my students recently, that the website as an MVP can function as this exceptional viable product. It can be visually appealing, it can be functional, viable, it can help contribute to establishing a brand or a reputation for students. So the website, in my opinion, actually facilitates more learning than a low fidelity MVP, something like a sketch on a napkin or even a flyer created through Canva. It's very flexible, it can be changed rapidly for either major or minor pivots, and it's applicable for virtually all student startups, as e-commerce is a very important aspect. This isn't a new concept. My colleague, David Ron, you may have heard his talk earlier in the conference. He and to some extent me have been arguing this for years, that students really need to pay attention to this e-commerce portion of their ventures. And I think our remote lockdown environment has really sort of shed light on the importance of that and exposed some ventures and businesses that don't have an aspect of e-commerce in their business. So my tip, my first kind of tip, if you saw somebody pose these questions in the app earlier today about what are some of my tips, they kind of set me up with a softball here, is really the importance for the instructor or the mentor, whoever is guiding the student or the founder, to really focus strategically on the purpose of the MVP. Yes, it's for learning, but in my experience, students tend to really overlook the business model aspect. That they create a website and there's no appeal to the target market on there. There's no discussion of the problem they're trying to solve or solution. So I believe that the instructor really needs to emphasize that and then use whatever you're teaching in class, if it's a business model concept statement or a business model canvas or a lean canvas, whatever you use I think would work, and then you translate that to the website that you have the students create. The mechanics of creating the website actually is pretty easy. This solves some of the aesthetics issues too that sometimes students have. So if you use a free tool like Wix, there are templates that have been created by professionals, communication specialists. They're organized by business type. It's very easy to find and search them. They're customizable. So once you find a template, you can move around the boxes and buttons. You can use the preloaded ones they have. Students can upload their own pictures if you want. They also have forms where you can get signups for emails, like a lead magnet. And then there's also a free third-party plugin that will track some analytics. So with those last two together, the students using this form of an MVP will get some really good quantitative data on validating their assumption or invalidating it, because they'll be able to track visitors to the website and then see how many of them are converting by signing up for the website. So let me show you an example of one of my students' projects earlier this week. We did this remotely, so it can be done in this remote environment. They're working on a venture idea to help international students on campus. You can see they have a tagline here. They have a picture of their app. They have a sign up here for their email addresses that they're going to collect. They get into a little bit of the problem and the solution. They use some emotional appeals for their target audience. They've integrated another MVP here, so they have a link to an explainer video. They've gone through here and listed some of the features of their app. And then down here, they integrate some offline activities of some events for the international students. Down at the bottom here, they have some facts to kind of overcome some of the aversion that the customers might have. And then again, at the bottom, another contact information and a call to action of subscribing. Okay, so my 5 minutes are just about up. If you want to continue the conversation, we're going to have some time for questions that the moderator will have now or at the end of that. I'm not sure what the plan is, but you can follow up with me personally if you want to use the chat feature, or you can message me in the app or send me an email. I've also created a Google Doc that I'd like to share with everybody, and I'd like to have it for the possibility of you sharing any resources that you might have had. So I'm going to post that into the chat. Oops.
Okay, while you're doing that,
right, so I'm going to hand it back over to the moderator, and then I'm going to post the link in the chat here that you can use. These are resources that I've used in my classes before, except for the 2 prototyping ones.
Okay, Jamey, thank you for your opening presentation. We're going to save questions to the end so that we can hear from all the presenters and then engage in a Q&A. So let me now introduce Denis Iurchenko to talk a little bit about crowdfunding.
All right. Thank you very much, Alex, for the introduction. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to present my study. Let me just. All right, so it's this study I have written together with my co-authors, Jeffrey Petty from the University of Lausanne and Björn Block from University of Trier, Germany. And in this study, we're really looking into equity crowdfunding as part of the validation process. So we know today we are part of this bigger discussion about the lean startup. And really, equity crowdfunding is one of the ways how we can get positive or negative feedback about your products, get some insight from your customers, whether they like it or not. We know that in a couple of years ago, we have witnessed the digitalization of entrepreneurial finance with the emergence of fintech, ICO, Bitcoin, and other financial innovations such as crowdfunding. In general, when we talk about crowdfunding, we tend to focus on, rewards-based crowdfunding, such as Kickstarter. So there is some difference between Kickstarter and equity-based crowdfunding. The main difference is that reward-based crowdfunding, it primarily targets consumers. So in this mode, you invest in the products as a potential customer. All you get in return would be T-shirts, a thank you note, something tangible, but they target consumers. We also know that only 1 out of 472 successful Kickstarter projects raise above 1 million. So the vast majority raise $10,000, and Kickstarter accepts a lot of projects. So it's one model of crowdfunding, which is extremely popular all over the world, especially in the United States. But I'm going to be talking about other type of crowdfunding, which is equity crowdfunding. So there are a couple of differences. There is a potential to make money for investors. We talk about bigger amounts. Importantly, there's a mixture of professional and non-professional investors who do what we call, it's not a real due diligence, it's quote unquote due diligence, right? And professional investors could co-invest, so which is also a big difference between equity crowdfunding and reward-based crowdfunding. So here I'm just providing a couple of examples of equity crowdfunding. So this is sustainable packaging company, which is being featured on Circle Up. This is a Sugar Crave. So this is a sweet delivery service. So it's a delivery service like Grubhub and so, which delivers sweets. I'm sorry. And there is another company called Borrow a Boat. So it's a company which offers similar to Uber services, but for the boats. And as you can see, companies have been raising quite substantial amounts of money. So just to give you a bit more statistics, on average, equity crowdfunding campaign raises around $400,000, which is much bigger than when it comes to traditional reward-based crowdfunding. So this is the differences. How does this sort of due diligence process works? So you go to any page of a crowdfunding campaign. This is how they look like. There's an investor, his name, or maybe her name is Mr. Bean. And the investor is asking this really technical question about valuation. How did you come up with this valuation? And the team says, you know what, it's sensitive information. I cannot really post here. And the lead investor says, I'm sorry, but I cannot really invest unless I'm able to undertake full due diligence. And there is another investor, B, who really tried to read what Mr. Bean had to say. And so he or she decided to quit as well. So as you can see, investors do evaluations. So it's not due diligence, it's investor evaluation. They rely a lot on the opinions of lead investors. And it's really important for entrepreneurs to respond quickly in a convincing way. Because if they don't respond in a convincing way, the investment opportunity will be gone. Other investors will see this communication and they will be more likely to say no. So we saw that, we decided to look at the existing research, and we found out that there are actually not so many studies which will be looking at communication, this type of communication. There are self-reported studies, there are studies of investor updates or messages of investors who invested, but we don't find so many studies that will be looking at the investor-initiated communication. So based on that, we decided to conduct our study and ask a couple of questions. The first one, do this discussion have an impact on whether a particular campaign raises funding or not? And secondly, are those patterns of communication, dynamic patterns and thematic patterns, have any impact on equity online investor entrepreneur online discussion? And we have tracked all the Crowdcube campaigns. And by the way, Crowdcube is the biggest equity crowdfunding platform in the world, located in Great Britain, and there are international campaigns there as well. We have analyzed quite a lot of discussions. And this, before we proceed with the results, I have a couple of hypotheses for you. So number one, there will be positive relationship between the number of discussions and performance, because we know that communication matters. So if there is more communication, I think it will be related to performance. Number two, it's related to team. We think that discussions focused on the team will be positively related to equity crowdfunding performance, because team has been established as one of the main decision criteria in the entrepreneurship literature. So number 3 and 4, so discussions focused on product. Number 3 and 4, we think that the evaluation patterns in the crowdfunding context will be similar to evaluation patterns in the VC context. So first of all, investors would look at the product already at the early stage of the campaign. And if they are satisfied with the product, they will go forward to the market. So they will evaluate product first, and then first of all, they will look at the product and the market at the early stage of the evaluation. And so this will have a positive influence on crowdfunding success as well. And number 5, we think that once investors are satisfied with product and market, they will move further to the finance. So if there's something, if you're not satisfied with the product quality or the market quality, then there is no reason to go into the financial discussion, right? So if it happens, it will only take place at the later stage when there is more, it has more positive influence on the equity crowdfunding success. So we found, first of all, this is the general overview. Consistent with other crowdfunding studies, we find that there are more discussions between entrepreneurs and investors at the very beginning of the campaign. And then the discussion trails down. So the most important part, it happens on average during the beginning of the campaign, but it's also, there's some discussion which also happens like during the 10th day, the 15th day, 20th day, and then numbers start to be low. So going back to the results, we found that, oh, there's something wrong with my sound. Okay.
Sorry, it's only when, yeah.
All right. So we found that
We do only have a few minutes, so summarize, please.
yeah, I do. So we found that in general, discussions have impact on for all models that we use. Discussions about the team have no statistically significant impact. It's an interesting result. Product and model discussions are consistently insignificant, but become positive and significant if you focus on the later stage discussions. The market category early stage is positive, and discussion on finance at the later stage are as positive as we predicted. So interestingly, product and model discussions still important at the later stage. Conclusions. So entrepreneur investor discussions positively related to performance. Evaluation criteria evolve during the course of the campaign. Team characteristics addressed by few investors. And a couple of implications for entrepreneurship education. Classic funding landscape disrupted. Equity crowdfunding is available almost at any stage, both at the early stage and at the later stage. Students need to learn how the crowd does its due diligence. How do investors evaluate decision criteria? Online campaigning skill, we need to teach students how does the social media communication work and how do they need to respond to the queries from other investors. So thank you very much for your attention. I'll be happy to respond to your questions. Contact details. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Denis. Just in the interest of time, we have 25 minutes left in the session, and I want to get to our last presenter, Dr. John York.
Okay. Denis, would you do me a favor and disconnect from your presentation so I can share screen? Okay, that should get me to my deck. Oh, no pressure here, Alex. So I got 15 slides in basically 10 minutes. I'll talk like I'm from New York, which is where I was born. At Cranfield, we actually are encouraged as doctoral students to get into our professional communities to get feedback on the topics that we are investigating. As I mentioned earlier, one of the pondering questions that I've been looking at has been, how do we define success with the lean startup phenomenon? And if you take a step back and you ask the question of what is success, I'm sure that everyone can come up with their own definition. And as Socrates says, it depends. In fact, you could even look at failure as a success, as long as it translates through learning to success. And that's why experimentation is very important. And hopefully, as we know in Silicon Valley, we can fail fast. So Jamey's done a real nice job explaining the lean startup phenomenon. I'll just emphasize the point of experimentation, customer discovery, build, measure, learn experimental loops using that MVP, and some sort of learning action of pivoting, iterating, moving forward, or exiting. And we all use a canvas of some sort to help us validate our assumptions around a business model that could be repeatable. But the question that we have to ask is, does lean startup translate, and how? If you look at some definitions of success with lean startup, I came up with 10, and I'm sure that everybody likes number 10. I know Eric and Steve would. but there are a number of different definitions. And so I think point of our research is really to hone into how we will define it, but also as in how do we measure it so that we can, from an empiric standpoint, know that what we're doing in our educational efforts does make a difference. So why is this important? We've been dealing with lean startup for the last 10 years in our classrooms, accelerators, and government programs, and even in big corporations like GE. But the bottom line is that most of the evidence of success is anecdotal. Okay, even Fredrickson and Brem in their 2017 paper point out. But what about the lens of the scholarly empiric literature? I actually undertook last year a look at the literature with a broad definition on lean startup to include adaptive strategy as well as search. And what I gathered was, and I love how Contigiani and Leventhal summarize, that we have a nascent literature with a limited mix of studies, okay, that reflect a variety of methodologies, endpoints, industries, firm types, and results. Easily, this discussion could take an hour to go through these studies, but I'm going to hit some highlights. 1, 5 of these 9 studies look at lean startup. 2, 3 actually make some sort of comparison, whether it's to a business plan or not using lean startup. 3 is the N being over 100 teams. There's only 2 studies, that of Ladd and Camufo, and last but not least, Camufo's data, which just was recently published this fall, which was a randomized controlled study. And it's been cited as probably one of the most rigorous studies in using a rigorous implementation of lean startup versus more of an ad hoc usage, and having an impact in terms of the ability to discard ideas early, pivoting, and also even revenue and time to revenue. Well, I presented this in our first panel in December, and I passed through the 4 horsemen successfully. And in the UK, you don't get a grade. What you get is either it's satisfactory, and if not, you got to go back and start all over again. So I passed, and my reward was more research. That's right. They opened up the world of organizational learning and business model innovation, which translated to hundreds of papers to read, and my time in sequestration has been basically writing, which has been 28,000 words for a new positioning paper that comes out in June. The take home from this research are, 1, learning is a common thread when we think about these 3 streams. Okay, particularly a lot of roots exist within the organizational learning literature. 2, do not discount the business model. The business model and business model innovation are critical pieces, and part of that is the experimentation process. And that experimentation is not just about learning, but it's about legitimization and enactment. And 3 is that lean startup conversation is evolving. It is a new literature, okay? Maybe 300 peer review papers, if that much. And there are things that are popping up over the last few years, issues with it, boundaries, that rigorous use makes a difference, and that the success literature is nascent. So there's an opportunity to make a difference in contributing something that adds to the conversation. So moving forward, as we know, with most good research, we got to start with some questions. We see this broad overarching question, okay? We're working on some refinements. What lens will we use? And there are multiple ways that we can look at this problem and define the problem and measure the problem. These pieces have to tie together because this will then define a direction that we would want to take. In addition, we have to think about contextual factors, both internal contextual factors such as the entrepreneur and the team, and the external contextual factors such as the environment, the competition, even presence of investment within your community, and various boundary conditions such as lean doesn't necessarily apply to all type of business sectors. And so we need to find business sectors which are more lean friendly. And last but not least is where. School, class, co-working settings or accelerators. And that's an area, particularly the last two that I mentioned, that my supervisors are encouraging me because they're practice oriented. So I have two ideas that I want to touch on real quickly. The first is looking through the lens of organizational learning and the concept of what we call innovation legitimacy. And this builds on, from the organizational learning literature, Crossan's work, which involved the 4 I's of organizational renewal, that of intuiting, interpreting, integrating, and institutionalization, which feed forward from the individual to the group. But as we get buy-in to ideas and create knowledge, and then evolve to routines and practices, that those feed back and are exploited by the organization. Well, the interesting thing is that this concept, which was originally designed for much more of a formal institutional organization, has been extended into entrepreneurship by Dev Duda, who was one of Mary Crossan's PhD students over at Ivy. And I talked to Dev actually yesterday, and I think the take home from their ETP paper, I do encourage you guys to read this paper because it's really a nice treatment of the 4 I's into this space, is that the individual entrepreneur can intuit and develop their ideas, but there is this process within the firm, okay, or the startup, in terms of gaining legitimacy, which involves the 3 other ideas, but you can extend it out into the ecosystem in the community with investors and partners and customers, and that you have a feed forward, but this feedback mechanism, which in many ways extend to the diffusion of innovation, if you think about it. So my defining questions tend to be a little bit more lending to qualitative type of research, but can firms use lean startup effectively to feed forward and legitimize their business innovations? And you could take it down to the level of the individual entrepreneur. What is the perceived experience using lean startup on their ability to legitimize as seen through the lens of the 4 I's? The second idea I have is bridging exploration exploitation with an input-output model. And I put up this schema from Gazy, which from a beautiful article he had on Lean Startup. And what he points to is that product market fit sort of fits as the pinnacle between transitioning from the iteration and effectuation that goes on with Lean Startup to then the exploitative processes that we would see with the business plan. Hence, it lends to the opportunity of setting up an input-output model, which I fashioned after work by Burke and Green and Burke as they try to address the controversy around, does business plans work? So in essence, you could go lean startup versus non-lean startup, and then look at internal contextual factors that will shape, as well as external contextual factors, and then some sort of output mechanism, product market fit, pitch results. We could even put Denis's crowdfunding responses in terms of financing. You could take it into a second phase, which is extending now, tying into the business plan. Do you use a business plan or not business plan? If we do, considering again, external and internal factors, what is the impact? And this was my original area I want to look, was new venture performance. And that is really the sine qua non, which is, does it have an impact on sales, growth, profitability, and survival? And these are the defining questions. Can firms using Lean Startup achieve these short and long-term milestones, considering all the internal and external factors? And if you use a business plan with Lean, is it better than just using Lean alone? Which brings me to really where we started off with, which is, how do we define success with Lean Startup? And I go back to the great article that talks about framing and perspective. It's whether the elevator is too slow or the wait is too long. And it depends on how you view the problem and the lens you use and the questions you ask. Right now, I'm the beginning of a journey, and I wish to make an interesting contribution to the literature around Lean Startup, but also in terms of from some of these perspectives that I've shared. And I do welcome your questions and your thoughts, and if you want to collaborate, I've left my contact information. With that, I'll transition back to the discussion. Alex, take it away.
Great, thank you, John. Well, it's a very fascinating discussion in terms of, you know, some possible research opportunities to move forward.
Absolutely. And in fact, I talked to Dev yesterday as a result of this conference, and he and I have already talked about collaborating together. So thank you, Alex. Guys, did we lose?
It's yours, John.
Is it mine?
I don't know whether it's
I can
me
hear
or
you, John.
it's yours, John.
Is it mine?
Okay.
I can hear you, John.
I'll pull off my video.
Okay.
I'll pull off my video.
All right. I hope people can hear me. My question, if you can hear me, is for Jamey. And Jamey, I'd like you to, I mean, you've heard these two research presentations on defining success in lean startup and really trying to deepen our understanding of equity crowdfunding. Yours was incredible in the sense of thinking about developing minimum viable products online. Do you see any possible areas for research questions around what you're doing in the classroom to bring out minimum viable products online?
Oh, I think definitely. I would very much agree with John's research. There's not a lot done on lean startup. A lot of it's, you know, talk, anecdotal, maybe qualitative research, but I'd like to see some more. So what does the success look like? And so I have my students do some research. So on their MVPs, right? So some of them will collect quantitative data. They will, collect page views, signups, things like that. Or I have some of them do qualitative data where they'll interview people about the websites and try to get feedback. But it isn't, there's not a lot in the research that kind of combines the two, I'd say, with lean and then kind of what a lot of us are teaching right now. And so I think that's very ripe. So I'm glad that there's some people working on that.
If I could just jump in real quick, there's two maybe pieces of literature that might be helpful to jump off in there. One paper is by Mansouri out of Sweden, and he actually studies in the accelerator setting in terms of the impact of the training, and you might get some ideas relative to that. The second piece is by Ted Ladd, who looks at the impact of a class on entrepreneurial cognition, and you could use pretty much standard survey and metrics like EIEO, ECE as endpoints in a survey as well. So that might be something to at least help to quantify the impact of your program.
I'm looking, we have about 9 minutes left in this session, and if I see any questions coming through the chat, I'll be happy to incorporate them into our discussion. But let me go back to Denis and your presentation. I think you've opened up a whole new area of research, which is an emerging area of looking at equity crowdfunding. I think we've gotten used to the Kickstarters of the world in terms of entrepreneurs trying to raise some early money. But when you think about these kind of crowdfunding platforms with respect to equity, you've opened up some new areas of research. So my question to you is, where do you see research going in the equity crowdfunding space?
Thank you very much. I think one of the interesting discussions would be to actually understand this communication between entrepreneurs and investors in detail across other countries, because I've looked at the British platform. So they're mostly projects which are from Europe, from other countries. It will be interesting to look at the results across several countries and see if my findings will hold. What other, I think another interesting direction which I haven't seen many papers in equity crowdfunding on that as well, would be to actually see whether in the long term perspective, whether those companies or startups that receive funding from the equity crowdfunding, on the long term, do they perform better as opposed to those who receive Kickstarter funding? And do they create more jobs at those which receive more funding from Kickstarter? So what are the long-term macroeconomic impacts on equity crowdfunding as opposed to traditional reward-based crowdfunding? That would be a very interesting research direction, I think.
Thank you. To my conference back office team, I'm not seeing the questions coming in through the Whova, and so I don't see any of the questions. I can only see the Zoom questions. So Ayman, if you see any other questions, feel free to, I want to take a couple of questions from the audience. Okay, I mean, for people in the audience, if you have questions, you may be submitting them via the Whova app, but for some reason, I'm not seeing those questions. So if you put them in the Zoom chat, I might be able to handle some of your questions for our panel.
Alex, I believe there was a few.
Okay, Tammy, let's pick one of the questions because for some reason, I'm not seeing it.
Let me see here.
Yeah, just read one of the questions.
Yeah, no, I was going to say it should have been on the sheet of questions. Let me see if I can find that right now.
There's a question in the chat
let's
now.
not worry about it. Okay. All right.
Here we go. So it says, does the lean mindset change in moments of urgency?
That's a very, I think that's a very relevant question today. Does the lean mindset change given the current sense of urgency? If you're trying to learn on a business model, it's going to force you to pivot on a penny here, not even a dime. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. It could be even more sort of lean environment, less resources available if there's supply chain issues, for example.
Yeah, I just add in here that I think the lean startup model is built around efficiency and speed, and that in essence, if you have a minimum viable product that is operational, that you can get into an exploitive mode very quickly than some other mechanism, e.g. stage gate, that's there. I do caution on the other side is there is literature out there relative to the startup genome, which cautions about premature scaling and that taking the time to experiment and really nail down the right product and the right market, so you have that product market fit, will translate to a much more successful firm in the long term. That's there.
Awesome. And then I'm just going to throw some questions that we know we had. I'm going to move quick, Alex, real quick. How do we integrate hypothesis development and testing into the use of MVP and business model assumptions? What resources may be available? Do any of you guys want to kind of grab that one?
Tam, could you repeat that one for me?
Yes, for sure. How do we integrate hypothesis development and testing into the use of MVP and business model assumptions? What resources may be available?
Okay, so I'll start comment on it first. So the MVP is a method or a tool to test out some of the hypotheses. So often I call them business model experiments in my class. I try to compare it to like the scientific method, which appeals to some of my students that are not business students especially. So I think that's a tool. And then if you look at the Google Doc that I posted in the chat, there's a lot of resources that will help students create a professional looking MVP quickly and or free.
Can I add to that?
All right.
I think there's a great resource out there from Strategy, a book on testing startup ideas. It came out in February, and if it isn't in your bookshelf, it's a wonderful addition. And I think that by having that, that might be able to help you address some of the issues.
All right. What I liked about this session, it's very provocative from a research point of view. I think that Jamey's doing, I like the work that you're doing by getting our students to actually develop their MVPs online. And you know, originally I was thinking about that in a, for online kind of products and so forth, but you've demonstrated that that could really has potential to migrate into the physical space at some point too, with very early stage MVP development online. Denis, I think you're doing very important work. As a matter of fact, I asked you to join our session because your research was award-winning at the past USASB conference. So congratulations on that. And we hope to see more work in this area. And John, you are a wellspring of knowledge. You've read just about every article written in this space, and your command of the literature is just tremendous. And so it creates opportunities for our researchers in the field to engage with you, with all of you, because you have the potential to take these areas into some new heights. So I hope this leads to some further collaborations, but we are out of time on this session, and hopefully you'll join us later on today for our virtual social gathering, and maybe our presenters can be there to interact with you in a more informal setting. So I'm going to close this session out, and we'll have 2 more sessions going on in about 10 minutes. So thank you to all of our panelists.
Thank you,
Take
Alex,
care.
for setting this up.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Thanks.